Before the legend of Sherlock Holmes began, there was a murder. Before the partnership with Dr. Watson, there was doubt. And before the fame, there was a man like me watching it all unfold. This is the story of the case that changed everything. Not from the papers, not from Holmes's own lips, but from mine. I'm Inspector Lestrade, and this is how I learned to follow a genius. Make sure to hit the like button, subscribe, and leave a comment if you enjoy these immersive stories from the shadows of Baker Street. The fog rolled in heavy over the city that morning, settling upon Scotland Yard like a judgment. I remember distinctly the muffled clatter of hooves against wet cobblestone, the scent of coal smoke hanging in the air, and the way every footstep in the corridor echoed as though heralding something dire. It was Patterson who brought the news, face pale beneath his constable's cap. "There's been a murder in Lauriston Gardens, sir." I looked up from my desk, where reports lay in untidy piles. Petty thefts, a stabbing in Limehouse, a string of burglaries in Paddington. All solvable, all comfortable. "A murder," I repeated, rising slowly. "Yes, sir. The victim is male. Found in an abandoned house, no sign of struggle. What's queer, there's no wound, no blood. Nothing but the word rake written on the wall in red." I felt a tightening in my chest, though I showed none of it. "Gregson, already on his way, sir." Of course he was. Tobias Gregson never missed the scent of something he might claim for himself. My coat was on in a moment. I remember fastening the second button as I descended the stair. The air was thick with anticipation, and I confess, though I have worn the badge for over a decade, I felt the stirrings of unease. Not fear precisely, but something near it. The house stood alone, its windows boarded haphazardly, the garden overrun with nettle and weed. A pair of constables held back a small, murmuring crowd. I stepped inside and the chill met me like a slap. Gregson stood near the hearth, arms crossed, his fair hair disheveled as though he'd run a hand through it a dozen times. "Morning, Lestrade," he said without turning. "Hope you brought a better theory than I've managed." "What have we?" I asked, surveying the drawing room. A single candle had been lit to ward off the gloom. The dead man sat propped against the wall, eyes open, mouth twisted in an expression of such confusion it bordered on fear. His clothes fine but travel-worn, his boots muddy. No bruising, no visible trauma. And there, just above his head, scrawled in crimson on the yellow plaster, "Rake." "Means revenge in German," Gregson muttered. "But I suspect you knew that." "I did." I crouched beside the body. "Any identification?" "None. Empty pockets. No weapon. Door was locked from the inside. No sign of forced entry." I frowned. "No wound?" "None. Coroner's on his way. But between you and me, Lestrade, this case doesn't smell right. It's as though someone meant it to look unsolvable." I finished. Gregson gave me a quick glance. "Exactly." We stood in silence for a moment, 2-yard men surrounded by shadows, each uncertain. For years, I had walked into crime scenes with the confidence of routine, with the expectation that, eventually, patterns would emerge. But here, no pattern, only chaos. That was the beginning, the day my certainty began to fracture. I did not know it then, but the case of Lauriston Gardens would mark the moment my career, no, my life, would shift upon an unseen axis. Not because of the crime, no, but because of the man who would soon step into its orbit. And with him, the quiet doctor who followed close behind. The midday light fought vainly through the boarded windows, casting long, pale slats across the floor like the ribs of some long-dead beast. The corpse, meanwhile, retained its macabre dignity, refusing to yield even to the morbid curiosity that hung in the stale air. Gregson paced behind me, his boots scuffing the floor with every turn. "I've sent for the photographer," he said, though there was little for the lens to capture. "Though I suppose even a blank wall deserves its portrait when the word rake is written upon it in blood." I rose slowly and brushed dust from my knees. "It is blood." "Preliminary guess, yes. Smeared with a finger. No brushwork. Rather bold, don't you think?" Murder a man and then pause to compose a message in blood? What sort of killer behaves so theatrically? The sort that wants to be known, I replied, glancing again at the red letters. Or the sort that wishes to mislead. Gregson grunted. Foreigners, likely. I'm telling you, this business stinks of the continent. You'd blame a German for the fog if you could, Tobias? I said, with more sharpness than I intended. He turned sharply, eyes narrowing. And you'd chase shadows if they bore an accent, Lestrade. But this isn't one of your Bow Street hauntings. This is a proper murder in a proper house with a proper corpse and no proper clue. I stepped closer to the wall, studying the letters. The R was sharp, almost carved into the plaster. The S slanted strangely. The E seemed smudged. Unless the clue is in what's not here, I murmured. Gregson sighed, pulling a flask from his coat. I suppose you'll be wanting to bring in some outside genius. One of your eccentric informants, perhaps. That little chemist fellow, what's his name? Sharply? Holling. Holmes, I said quietly. He laughed. Yes, Holmes. That oddball who lounges about Bart's hospital fiddling with poisons and writing monographs no one reads. He'll tell us the man was poisoned by Egyptian incense and murdered by a one-legged baker from Stepney. I did not laugh. You jest, I said. But he's solved 3 cases for the Yard this year, unofficially. And made fools of us every time, Gregson replied with a scowl. No, Lestrade. If this one's to be solved, it'll be by us. Proper detectives. Not dabblers in tobacco ash. I said nothing. A memory flickered in my mind. Holmes, grinning over a telegram he'd intercepted, predicting a suicide before it occurred. The Yard had ignored him. The press had not. A sharp knock at the door interrupted us. It was a young constable, breathless. Beg pardon, sirs. A message from the coroner's office. Dr. Trevelyan is detained. There'll be no examination till evening. Gregson cursed under his breath. Very well, he said. Keep the scene sealed. No one in or out. I lingered, eyes drifting again to the wall. Rake. A message or a riddle? Or perhaps both. I felt the weight of the case settling on my shoulders like an iron coat. Are you going to bring him in? Gregson asked, adjusting his collar. Your ghost sniffer? I hesitated. I may at least hear what he has to say. Gregson scoffed. Suit yourself. But mark my words, Lestrade. One of these days, your Holmes will hang you with one of his clever strings. He stepped out into the gray light. I remained, alone with a body, a word, and a whisper of doubt I could no longer ignore. The next morning broke in fits and starts. Pale sun pushing through a thin curtain of cloud, the sound of iron wheels clattering against cobblestone, and the low groan of a city stretching itself toward midday. I found myself, to my own quiet astonishment, walking the echoing halls of St. Bartholomew's Hospital, my boots clicking on stone as though marking time with my conscience. I told myself it was only curiosity, a final indulgence before I cast the Luriston case back into the dark file of unsolved affairs. The laboratory was in the north wing, above the surgical theater, and smelled of carbolic, sulfur, and something faintly electric. Ah, Inspector Lestrade, came a voice from within, high, brisk, and uncomfortably sure of itself. Sherlock Holmes did not look up from the long wooden bench where he hunched over a line of test tubes. His dark coat discarded and sleeves rolled to the elbow. A thin plume of greenish smoke curled from a flask beside him, its color mirrored faintly in the light of the window. I thought it might be you, he said. The scuff on your right sole has widened since I saw you last. Only a man in your profession would be so indifferent to the wear. I stopped, both unnerved and, annoyingly, impressed. I'm surprised you remember my tread. He stood suddenly, wiping his hands with a linen cloth. I remember all useful things, and the Yard tends to walk heavily when in need. I clenched my jaw. You're not a constable, Holmes, nor a detective, and yet you call yourself a consulting one. A necessity born of inefficiency, he replied, flashing a grin. I do what you cannot, or rather, what you do not, until someone like myself forces your hand. It took effort not to rise to the bait. "We've a case," I said plainly. "Lauriston Gardens. Dead man, empty pockets, no wound, words scrawled in blood. Rake," he finished for me. I blinked. "How?" "My dear Lestrade, you forget how news moves. The cabbies, the butchers, the bootblacks. London has more eyes than Scotland Yard and faster mouths besides." He moved with a sudden burst of energy, gathering a notebook and a pair of gloves. Behind him, I noticed, for the first time, a man seated quietly in a high-backed chair near the fire. He looked up when addressed, his expression calm, his skin pale, and a walking cane resting by his leg. "Inspector, may I introduce Dr. John Watson," Holmes said. "Recently of the 5th Northumberland Fusiliers. Returned from Afghanistan with a limp and a need for tolerable company." Watson stood and extended his hand. "A pleasure, Inspector. I've heard of you, of course." I shook his hand, noting the strength behind it. "Doctor." Holmes was already donning his coat. "Watson's here for observation. He finds my little investigations amusing. Like theater, but with mud and gunpowder." "I'm more interested in the method," Watson corrected gently. Holmes turned to me, his face suddenly sharpened with focus. "You say no wound, but men do not die without cause. I suspect poison or shock or something more deliberate. The word on the wall is no flourish. It's either clue or trap. Likely both." "And you can prove that?" I asked, folding my arms. "I can show you what your eyes have overlooked." There was no arrogance in the way he said it, only certainty. I hesitated, then gestured toward the door. "Come, then. If you mean to see the body, best do it before the coroner makes his hash of it." Holmes clapped Watson on the shoulder. "To Lauriston Gardens, Doctor. The game is afoot." And though I wouldn't admit it then, some restless corner of my mind stirred with reluctant hope. The ride to Lauriston Gardens was an uneasy affair. Holmes, perched on the cab's edge like a bird about to take wing, spoke in bursts. Mostly to himself, mostly in fragments. "No wound, yet dead. No robbery, yet empty pockets. A word in blood, yet no blood from the corpse." He tapped his fingers rapidly against the window pane. "Curious, curious. The theater of it all." Dr. Watson, meanwhile, sat beside him in polite silence, absorbing Holmes's manner as one might study a foreign script. I, for my part, kept my eyes on the road and my thoughts in guarded corners. I did not trust the man. Not entirely. And I mistrusted even more my own flickers of admiration. When we arrived, the constable on duty raised his brow at the sight of Holmes. "Another one of your experts, Inspector?" I gave a terse nod. "He's here with my leave." We entered the house, still untouched since the day prior. The body remained against the wall, the blood-lettered rake, still drying into a deeper shade of rust. The staleness of the air, combined with the sweet sick scent of death, made the room feel closer than its four walls. Holmes dropped to his knees almost at once, producing a magnifying lens from his coat and crawling like a hound about the room. "There's the artist at work," I muttered to Watson. He smiled faintly. "He's always like this." I observed the good doctor more closely, calm, reserved, his eyes neither too wide nor too wary. His presence was not theatrical. If Holmes was lightning, Watson was the ground it struck. Holmes called from across the room. "Lestrade, come look here if you would be so good." I walked over, bending as he pointed to the floor near the fireplace. "What do you see?" he asked. "Dust. Boot prints, perhaps." "Yes, and one deeper than the rest, slightly toed outward, as if the man had a limp or carried a heavy object. And notice here, ashes." I peered closer. "Cigar." "Not quite. Trichinopoly. Indian tobacco. Very strong." Watson spoke from behind. "Colonial import. Only the wealthier officers indulged in it." Holmes snapped his fingers. "Exactly, my dear fellow. And here." He moved to the wall. "This word, rake. Most would say it's German for revenge." "It is," I offered. Holmes's eyes twinkled. "And yet the rest of the scene tells an English tale. The boots are of British make. The dust here is soot from a London chimney. The ink smudges on the victim's thumb suggest recent writing. I dare say he was a man of letters. Why, then, a foreign clue? To mislead, Watson answered softly. Holmes nodded approvingly. Indeed, a false trail laid with care. Our murderer wants us to believe this is the work of some wild-eyed Teuton bent on vengeance. But the real killer, I think, is far more clever and far closer to home. I stared at the wall, unease creeping through me. You speak as if you've already met him. In a manner of speaking, Holmes replied. He stood, brushing dust from his knees. I know his height, his gait, his likely occupation, and his recent route through the city. All I require now is a name. I could not hide the disbelief in my voice. From this room, from these facts, he corrected. Everything leaves a trace. Men lie. Dust does not. There was a silence, broken only by the creak of the old floorboards. Holmes turned to Watson. Doctor, shall we take a walk down Brixton Road? I believe we'll find a cabman with unusual memories. Watson nodded. Of course. Holmes paused beside me before he left. Lestrade, he said, you're welcome to follow, or you can wait here until Gregson claims credit. With that, he swept from the room like a wind carrying storm clouds. Watson gave me a polite nod and followed. I remained in place, hands clenched behind my back, watching the blood-word dry. For the first time in my career, I did not feel like a man at the center of the investigation, but a spectator. And yet, something in me stirred. Not anger, not yet, something closer to awe. By the time I returned to the yard, the press was already clawing at the gate like starved hounds. The Telegraph ran with the headline Murder in Lauriston. Scotland Yard baffled, and Gregson had wasted no time feeding them convenient half-truths. In the constable's quarters, I overheard one of the younger men whispering, He's got no theory. Lestrade's bringing in that Holmes fellow again. The one who talks to corpses. The remark drew laughter. Cheap, nervous, unwelcome. I shut the door behind me with more force than necessary and made for my office. I had no desire for gossip or ridicule. I wanted answers. And, perhaps more truthfully, I wanted certainty, the kind I once held like a torch in the dark. Not an hour passed before Holmes appeared, uninvited as ever, sweeping into the room with his customary disregard for decorum. Dr. Watson followed, this time looking less the observer and more the assistant. His notebook in hand, pen ready. You might consider knocking, Holmes, I said curtly, and rob you of a dramatic entrance? Never, he replied, removing his gloves with a flourish. Besides, I've a gift for you. He tossed a small square of paper onto my desk. It was a cabman's ledger slip. A name, an address, and the hour of fare. Holmes tapped the name. Joseph Stangerson, former secretary to Enoch Drebber, late of Cleveland, Ohio. The victim in Lauriston Gardens. Traveled together until 3 days ago. Then separated. I suspect we'll find Mr. Stangerson shortly, though not, I fear, in good health. I stared at the slip, fighting the urge to let wonder show on my face. Where did you get this? I asked. Asked whom? A flower girl, a newspaper boy, and a one-eyed cabman with a fondness for gin. I narrowed my gaze. You expect me to build a case on hearsay? Holmes stepped forward, eyes glinting. I expect you to see. The case is not hiding Lestrade. You simply refuse to look past your procedure. I stood then, rising to meet him. And you refuse to acknowledge the law. You're a showman, Holmes. A conjurer with a magnifying glass. But justice is not theater. Nor is it bureaucracy, he countered smoothly. You chase shadows of motive and reputation while I trace footprints and ash. We stood toe to toe, two men from the same city, but different worlds entirely. And though I longed to shout him down, to strip his smugness away with rank and reason, I could not deny the mounting evidence. His words, maddening as they were, fit. Watson broke the tension. Gentlemen, perhaps this battle of virtues might wait until after we prevent another murder? Holmes tilted his head toward me, his voice lower now, almost conciliatory. "You're a good man, Lestrade, but if you insist on staring at the page, you'll miss the ink." With that, he turned to go, Watson falling into step behind him. As they departed, I found my fingers resting on the slip of paper. Stangerson. A name. A lead. The first we'd had. And it had not come from Gregson. Nor from me. I let out a long breath and sat down heavily, staring not at the paper, but at the empty doorway. Justice is not theater, I had said. And yet, I had just watched the curtain rise. When next I arrived at Lauriston Gardens, the morning was crisp, the streets glazed with frost, and the sun clawing its way over the chimney-tops like a tired soldier. I had slept little. The name Stangerson had not left my thoughts since Holmes placed it in my hand, and Gregson had done little more than scoff when I shared it. "Coincidence," he'd said. "Two Americans in London? A common enough affair. We've no proof the man's even missing." But something in the name stuck like a splinter. Holmes had drawn a line between it and the corpse. I could no longer ignore the shape it formed. Inside the vacant house, all was as we'd left it, though it now felt less mysterious, as though the spell had begun to lift. Holmes was already there, of course, crouched near the fireplace like a vicar before a grave. "Ah, Lestrade," he called without looking up. "Back to haunt the scene of the crime?" "You're the one who keeps returning to the corpse, Holmes," I replied. "What is it you see that we've missed?" He stood, dusting his hands. "Come now, let us both see." He led me across the room and pointed to a scuff on the baseboard. Faint, but deliberate. "A footprint?" I asked. Holmes shook his head. "Not quite. A scrape. From a heavy object, wooden, I'd wager. There are 3 others just like it. Together, they form a neat rectangle. A trunk. Precisely. And now it's gone. And yet the victim carried nothing." Holmes's expression grew taut. "Because it wasn't his." I blinked. "You believe the killer brought it? Or came for it?" Either way, he removed it before the scene was discovered. The blood on the wall was dry by the time the constable arrived. Yes, it was. Then the killer had time, perhaps planned for time, to leave with the object. And what sort of man has time to write in blood, hide his weapon, and carry off a heavy trunk, all without being seen? "A professional," I murmured. Holmes nodded, then tapped the heel of his boot against the floorboards. "Also, note the faint impression there. A partial print, clay residue. A gardener." Holmes smiled faintly. "You leap like a poet, Lestrade. But no. Clay like that is found in Limehouse, near the old soapworks, where the Thames runs sluggish and secrets sink quietly." He moved to the window, gazing out over the garden. Watson entered then, carrying a folded newspaper and a breath of cold air. "Morning, gentlemen," he greeted us. "News from the hotel on Euston Road. Stangerson hasn't returned since Tuesday. Room untouched. No sightings." Holmes's face darkened. "Then we are not racing a murder. We are chasing its echo." He turned to me. "We must find Stangerson, Lestrade. Dead or alive, he holds the next thread. And if we don't?" Holmes's voice dropped. "Then another man will die. And this time we will have been too late." A chill ran down my spine. Not from the cold, but from the certainty in his tone. It was not boastful. It was not dramatic. It was factual. Watson met my gaze, his own calm but unflinching. "You believe him now, don't you?" I paused, the room narrowing to stillness. "I don't know what I believe," I said truthfully, "but I know I'm not walking away." The pub was dim, its windows fogged with years of tobacco and the breath of defeated men. I sat in the corner booth beneath a gas lamp that hissed like a tired constable. A single pewter mug before me, half emptied, untouched for the better part of an hour. Outside, the city pulsed as ever. Omnibuses groaned under their weight, street sellers hawked roasted chestnuts, and somewhere in the distance, a train shrieked its way out of Charing Cross like a beast wounded and fleeing. But none of it reached me. I was drowning quietly. The Pall Mall Gazette lay folded on the table. Its headline read, "Murder in Lauriston. Unknown Detective Shame's Yard, and beneath it, Sherlock Holmes, A Mind Beyond Scotland Yard? My name was not mentioned, nor Gregson's. We were merely the authorities, vague and dismissive shadows from whom the genius had wrested the truth. I stared at the words as if they might rearrange themselves. But the ink held firm. A group of constables sat across the room, their drinks louder than their voices. Said Holmes knew the killer's height before seeing the body, one muttered. Aye, and the boots he wore, said another. From a smudge of soot. They laughed, and I felt the heat crawl up my collar. I rose abruptly, the bench groaning as I did. The barkeep gave me a nod, which I ignored. My hands were fists by the time I reached the door. Out in the street, the fog had thickened. It moved between gas lamps like a living thing, wrapping around my coat and curling in my lungs. I walked, past the river, past the old theater district, past the narrow alleys where I once chased thieves like a hungry dog and believed justice could be seen, glinting in a knife's edge or folded in a confession. But now it slipped through my fingers. It spoke in languages I had never learned, etched itself in ashes and footprints and fibers. It had a new name, Holmes. I stood alone by the railings near Blackfriars Bridge, the Thames churning black below. Is this it then? I asked myself. Is this where the tide turns? For years I had believed I was something, that I mattered, that Lestrade of the Yard stood for something more than duty and a battered notebook. But tonight I saw my own outline and it was fading. My hand drifted toward the badge in my coat pocket. The brass was cold, heavy. I thought for one mad instant of throwing it into the river. But my fingers closed around it instead. I turned from the water. There was still time, still questions unanswered, still a name, Stangerson. I would not be the ghost of the Yard, not yet. If Holmes had eclipsed me, I would still walk beside the shadow he cast. I would learn, I would listen, or I would burn trying. I returned to my office at Scotland Yard long after dark, shoulders damp with mist and mind clouded with thoughts I dared not speak aloud. The hallways were near silent, save for the low hum of gas lamps and the occasional scuff of a constable's heel. I welcomed the quiet. It gave me no answers, but it didn't ask questions either. I had just lit a lamp and set about removing my coat when a knock came, tentative, almost polite. I opened the door and found Dr. Watson standing there, hat in hand, eyes steady. "Inspector," he said, "might I come in?" I stepped aside, too weary for formality. "Of course, doctor, though I suspect I've little to offer tonight beyond a chair and my company." "That will do," he replied gently. Watson sat without ceremony, setting his cane beside him and crossing one leg over the other. His bearing was always calm, never arrogant, an anchor beside the storm that was Holmes. "I saw you leave the pub," he said after a moment. "You passed me near the corner of Fleet Street. You looked as though you'd been summoned to your own inquest." I offered a bitter chuckle. "That's not far off. If the press had their way, I'd be buried already. Holmes would be the eulogist, and you'd be the sole mourner." He shook his head. "That's not true, nor fair. The public likes a new thing, and Holmes is dazzling," I finished. "Yes, he is. Deduces a man's trade from his thumbprint, his breakfast from a grease mark. And the Yard? We plod. We follow. We wait until the clever man tells us where to look." Watson leaned forward, his voice calm but firm. "Lestrade, I know a bit about watching from the edge, about being useful only in the quiet spaces. You think I matter to Holmes because I take notes and patch his scrapes. Isn't that why he brought you in?" He smiled faintly. "At first, perhaps, but I stayed because I saw the shape of his mind and where it faltered. Holmes sees facts, patterns, but he doesn't feel them, not the way most do. That's where I come in." I looked at him, startled by the quiet dignity in his tone. "You're saying he needs you. I'm saying he needs all of us, though he'd rather chew iron filings than admit it." I stared into the lamp's glow. "You think there's a place for a man like me? When the world's already bought their tickets to his theater." Watson rose then, collecting his cane. I think you know this city better than he does. I think you understand what justice looks like in the real world beyond ash and footprints. And I think Holmes would be a fool not to listen when you speak." He paused at the doorway. "Don't let admiration sour into envy, Lestrade. He's not your rival. He's your ally, whether he knows it or not." He left then, the door clicking softly behind him. For several long moments I remained still, staring at the empty chair. The flame in the lamp guttered slightly, then steadied. I reached for my coat. There was still work to be done. Holmes's summons arrived by messenger not an hour after sunrise. A single line scrawled across a slip of parchment. "Come to 221B at once. A fly stirs in the web. SH." I found him standing in his sitting room, sleeves rolled, violin on the table untouched. A rare thing in itself. Watson was beside him, glancing through a ledger with the faintest trace of tension in his brow. A map of London was spread across the table, marked with inked dots that traced a path from Euston Road to Limehouse, then west toward Soho. Holmes greeted me without ceremony. "I trust you've rested? No? Good. That will save us the time of shaking off complacency." I frowned. "What's happened?" He motioned to the chair but did not sit himself. "Last night, a cabman visited the Hotel Charpentier, left no name, only a message for a Mr. Stangerson. That Drebber was dead, and that it was his turn next." Watson added quietly, "The hotel keeper's daughter overheard. Stangerson was not in. He hasn't returned since." I leaned forward. "You believe Stangerson is the next victim?" "I know he is," Holmes replied, already moving. "The murderer wants to finish what he started. The question is whether we can catch him between the attempt and the escape." "And how do we propose to do that?" I asked. Holmes's smile was sharp as a knife. "With bait." He turned to Watson. "Doctor, you remember the telegram we prepared?" Watson produced it from his coat. "Delivered this morning to all cab depots. Urgent fare awaiting Mr. Joseph Stangerson at Halliday's private hotel, room 17. I blinked. "But Stangerson isn't staying there." "Precisely. But our murderer believes he might be. And with luck, he'll arrive to finish the job." Holmes's eyes flicked to me. "That's where you come in." "I am to wait?" I said. "Hide behind the curtain while he arrives?" Holmes nodded. "With 2 men posted at the service entrance and Watson posing as the hotel clerk. We'll let him enter the trap freely. Murderers are bold, Lestrade, when they believe themselves unseen. I assume you've left yourself the role of conductor in this little performance?" He only grinned. The stage was set before the hour struck 10. I took up my position in the modest chamber at Halliday's, one revolver in my coat pocket, another in the drawer beside the bed. Watson, disguised in cap and waistcoat, waited at the desk downstairs. Holmes, I was told, had vanished into the alley behind the hotel, watching all visible to none. Time passed with a heaviness I can scarce describe. Every footfall in the corridor was a threat. Every creak of the building's bones a herald of danger. At precisely 10 minutes past the hour, there came a knock. "Room 17?" said a voice. Rasping, low, unfamiliar. I reached for the drawer. My pulse thundered like cannon fire. The knob turned, and in stepped a man of medium build, with narrow eyes and the lean shoulders of a driver. His cap was pulled low, but I could see the glint of something in his pocket. A blade, perhaps, or worse. I rose. "That will do, sir," I said. He froze, eyes flicking to mine, then to the drawer, then to the hallway. Behind him, Holmes appeared like a ghost from the corridor. "Jefferson Hope," he said, voice calm. "Former cabman, former miner, current fugitive. You are under arrest for the murders of Enoch Drebber and, by intent, Joseph Stangerson." Hope did not struggle. He simply sighed. "So, you did find the letters in his trunk?" "No," Holmes replied. "But thank you for confirming where they were." Watson stepped in beside him, and I approached the man, Jefferson Hope, with the irons. For the first time, I saw not just a murderer, but a man broken open by vengeance. There was no triumph in his expression. Only weariness. You've no idea what they did to her, he whispered. Holmes's gaze did not waver. No, but I know what you did to them. Hope did not resist as I fastened the irons round his wrists. His expression bore no hatred, no panic, only a weary sort of peace, as though he had waited long for this moment and met it now with a soldier's acceptance. Holmes studied him in silence, his gray eyes narrowed, unreadable. You knew we'd come, Holmes said at last. Hope gave a faint nod. After the telegram? Yes. But truthfully, I hoped it would be him. Stan Gerson? I asked. The man's jaw clenched. He was the crueler of the two. Drebber was filth, but Stan Gerson was ice. What they did to Lucy. His voice broke off, and for the briefest instant, I saw the grief that underpinned the fury. Not madness, as many a killer bore, but love twisted by time and pain. Holmes gestured for Watson. Fetch the cab. We'll take him through the back. The crowd won't be gentle, and this story has already grown long legs. Watson gave a nod and departed. Hope turned toward me. You'll want a statement. I'll give it. All of it. I've nothing to hide anymore. I'll take it myself, I replied. But not here. You'll speak on record, under guard. The man nodded again, as if expecting no less. We brought him out through the rear of the building, flanked by 2 constables and Watson at the fore. The alley was quiet save for the steady clop of the horses' hooves as our hired cab rolled into view. To any passerby, we might have looked like a group of old friends escorting a weary man home from a long night. But in truth, we were bearing the weight of justice, not triumphantly, but with care. As we loaded Hope into the cab, he turned to Holmes. She was only 18, he said quietly. We'd planned to marry once I returned from Utah, but Drebber, he took her, forced her. She wasted away in less than a year. I held her hand when she died. Holmes said nothing for a long moment. Then, in a voice stripped of mockery, he answered, You loved her. I believe that. Hope gave the smallest smile. She was my whole world. The door shut with a dull click. Back at the yard, the buzz of the press had already begun to thrum through the marble halls. Word traveled faster than orders. Tongues wagged quicker than pens could write. Gregson met us at the steps, his face lit with the kind of grin that sinks knives. Well done, Lestrade, he said, clasping my hand in exaggerated congratulation. I always said you had a nose for these things. I looked at Holmes, who stood just behind me, arms folded, face impassive. Yes, I said, but the scent wasn't mine alone. Gregson blinked, confused, but I walked past him before he could ask further, the prisoner between us and the truth behind me. Inside, as I penned the first lines of Hope's statement, I noticed Holmes had not followed. Only Watson remained, observing quietly from the corner of the room. I glanced at him. You're writing it down too, aren't you? He offered a modest smile. Of course, but not for the court. I nodded slowly. Some truths, it seemed, were not meant for the ledgers of the yard. They were meant for stories, for memory. By noon the following day, Gregson was already giving statements to the press. He stood outside the yard, chin high, shoulders back, his coat arranged just so, and spoke of dogged police work, of late nights and brilliant deductions. Not once did he mention Holmes. I watched from the window above, my arms folded tightly across my chest. The article that would follow, I could already see the headline in my mind's eye. Inspector Gregson cracks the case. Perhaps there would be a sketch of the Lauriston Gardens crime scene, or a dramatic rendering of the arrest. But the man who saw more from a footprint than we had from the body itself, he would not appear in the column. Nor would the doctor who stood quietly beside him. Below, the journalists scribbled furiously, and Gregson gestured as if painting his tale upon the fog. Behind me, footsteps stirred. I trust you've no objections to letting him enjoy the spotlight, came Holmes's voice. It was quiet, almost amused. I turned. None, I replied. Not anymore. Holmes gave a faint nod, as though testing the shape of my answer. The public prefers a clean ending, he said. a tidy line between good and evil, and they prefer their heroes in uniform. Even if they weren't there when the truth was found? He smirked. Especially then. I crossed to my desk and opened a drawer. From it, I withdrew a leather-bound notebook, worn at the edges, but still firm in the spine. Inside were pages upon pages of notes. Not from the Yard's files, but my own. Cases minor and major. Moments of success, yes, but also failure, confusion, revelation. I turned to the final entry. I titled it, The Case of Enoch Drebber and Jefferson Hope. Beneath it I wrote, solved not by process nor by rank, but by observation, deduction, and the unforgiving weight of memory. A cabman's vengeance, long harbored, a girl forgotten by all but one, and a detective whom the world has yet to understand. I closed the book. Holmes was watching me, no mockery in his gaze. You'll never say it aloud, I told him. But you care that it was done properly. He said nothing for a moment. Then, I care that it was done. He turned to leave but paused at the door. The next time you're handed a case the Yard can't explain, Inspector, you'll know where to find me. I already do. Watson was waiting outside. The two walked off down Whitehall, side by side, their coats trailing in the breeze, heads low in quiet conversation. I watched them go until they vanished around the corner. There would be other cases. There always were. But I knew, even then, that I had stood in the presence of something new. Not better than the Yard, perhaps, but beyond it. A mind like a razor, a heart, oddly quiet, a friendship I had yet to understand. And as I returned to my desk, I found myself writing the name, Sherlock Holmes. A week had passed since the arrest of Jefferson Hope, and though the feverish attention of the press had shifted to a bank fire in Clerkenwell, I remained occupied by thoughts of the case that had so thoroughly rearranged the map of my mind. The official files were closed. Hope had confessed everything. His long pursuit of Drebber and Stangerson across the ocean, the bitter memory of Lucy Ferrier, and the slow decay of his own health that had made his vengeance feel more like a duty than a choice. The newspapers called it romantic. The Yard called it closed. But I called it the beginning. It was a gray morning when I pulled open the drawer of my desk and laid out my own ledger. A journal I had, until recently, considered a curiosity. Now it was something else entirely. A witness. I dipped my pen, hesitated for the briefest moment, and then began to write. Private notes, not for official record. Lauriston Gardens will be remembered by the Yard as another grim affair. But for me it marked the turning of an age. I have long believed that truth belonged to men in uniform, guided by the lamp of reason and the steady hand of experience. Yet now I see that reason alone is not always sufficient. Sometimes it must be sharpened, honed to a blade by a man who sees more in a footprint than most do in a confession. Sherlock Holmes is not like other men. He is not gentle. He is not easy. But he is just. And I suspect, in time, the world will know it. I signed my name with a flourish I had not used in years. A knock came at the office door. I looked up. Watson entered, a small package under one arm and a mild smile upon his face. I come bearing thanks, he said, setting the parcel on my desk. From Holmes. Though, of course, he wouldn't be so gauche as to deliver it himself. I raised a brow. I'm surprised he thanks anyone. So am I, Watson said with a chuckle. But I believe he respects you, in his own peculiar fashion. I unwrapped the package. Inside was a monograph, bound in blue cloth, plain and unassuming. Upon the varying impressions left by the human foot, by S. Holmes. Tucked between the first pages was a handwritten note, underscore to G. Lestrade, for stepping beyond what is required. Such underscore. I closed the book gently. Watson turned to leave. Oh, doctor, I called after him. He'll need someone like you. Don't let him forget it. Watson paused at the door and nodded once. I won't. That night, as I left the Yard and stepped into the cool breath of evening, I felt something I had not felt in many months. Not pride, not vindication, but readiness. I knew Holmes and I would cross paths again. He would make the leap and I would measure the landing. He would see the storm and I would clear the wreckage. We would argue, we would clash. But beneath it all, I would listen. Because greatness, when it arrives, rarely wears the uniform we expect. And I, for one, intended to be ready the next time it knocked at Scotland Yard's door. Some say Holmes was arrogant. Others call him brilliant. But I say this, he saw what none of us dared to. And in doing so, he changed me. Thank you for listening to this tale from the other side of the yard. If you enjoyed the story, give it a like, subscribe for more weekly mysteries, and drop your thoughts in the comments. I read them all. Until next time, keep your eyes sharp and your footsteps quiet.